And welcome to the Cult Cinema Circle podcast. My name is Jesse, and I'll be your host. Now, on today's episode, we are going to try to rise up against the Tyrell Corporation for being a horrible corporation that's unleashing a bunch of robots on us. But also, we're gonna go to this weird apartment where this old guy lives and I don't know, do a backflip or something. But anyway, today though, we're going to be covering a little movie called Blade Runner from 1982. Now, this is a little different than what I have done normally. I did do The Fifth Element before with our boy Devon Taylor, but I actually was suggested to do this movie by some wonderful friends of mine who are actually joining me today for this episode. So that's right. You've heard them on their own show called The Movies That Made Us Gay, where they go over all different types of movies that have, in fact, made us all gay. Please welcome to the show, Scott Youngballer and Pete Lozano. Hey guys, how are you guys doing today?
Hello.
And that's hopefully I remembered your names, right? Youngbauer. You know what? Listen, I also
my Instagram handle.
Same goddamn difference. Listen.
That's my Instagram.
Okay, Scott Youngbauer.
Got Youngballer on Instagram.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So it's a Saturday today and we're recording, and we, it's been good. So yeah, when I've been on your show before, so I went on for Beautiful Thing, which I thought was wonderful when I was first starting my pod. And then now I was also on your Party Monster episode where we just complain about Party Monster. It was wonderful as well. But I wanted to bring you guys on because your podcast has been something that I've really liked for a while. And I'm so glad I was on it too. And I'd love to be on it again. But, I definitely wanted to bring you all on because I want to try and bring on guests and have them talk about movies that they like. And I asked you for different suggestions as I normally do of hey, what would you want to cover if you came on? Because, if I have a guest on, generally it's either I want them to help me cover a movie or I want them to kind of be the driver of the episode or be able to talk about something that means something to them, right? So first off, one of yours was I Saw What You Did with, was it Joan Crawford or one of those old stars, right?
Joan Crawford. One of the weird Joan Crawford movies from the 60s.
Yeah, that's not Baby Jane. Then there was another one, The Baby, which I still will do because that movie, I haven't seen it, but that's fucking crazy. I feel like you're fascinated with it. And it's on Shudder too, so you can watch it. But then you brought this movie to me, Blade Runner. Now, I will say, I had heard of Blade Runner before. I had no goddamn idea what it was about. I literally had no idea. And so I was Right. I was literally wait, the movie with Wesley Snipes? What the fuck are you talking about? But that's Blade. But I was okay, Blade Runner. All right, cool. But, I was all right, well, yeah, sure. Why not? Let's talk about it. Let's watch it. And then when I looked into it further and I was oh, this is kind of a cult classic because, Wikipedia says it is and the internet says it is. But, this does have a very storied, production history, a release history, everything like that. So I do think this episode in particular, we will talk about the plot a bit and, just the general story of it. But I definitely think we're talking more so about just the impact this movie has had. And again, wanting to have you guys talk about it as well, since you haven't. I don't think this is a movie that maybe has made you gay that you would cover on your show. I don't know.
I wanted to talk about this movie, partly just because I think that just the visual look of the movie and the women in this movie are so fucking fierce that I think that's why I kind of gravitate to this movie. But kind of when you mentioned what cult movies do you want to talk about, I mean, you have to start with Blade Runner because Blade Runner, I think, is the kind of pinnacle of just cult sci-fi. I mean, there were stuff like Star Wars before, but I mean, nothing really looked like this movie when it came out in 1982. And I think that's really important. And it's such a huge visual reference for filmmakers like Del Toro, James Cameron. Pete, can you think of any?
Well, I mean, you just covered The Fifth Element on your show, and it's I feel like we wouldn't have The Fifth Element, Luc Besson really.
True,
I know the visual inspiration for The Fifth Element was the
comic.
His own story he wrote. That was really
Thousand Planets.
What is it called?
Valerian.
Mm-hmm. Kind of, yes.
No, it absolutely was a 100% inspiration for him. It was a ripoff of Valerian. But that being said, a lot of the visual inspiration for this movie, and I think it just has cult classic written all over it. Just like by definition,
the ultimate cult classic.
It didn't really get a lot of traction when it was first released. It was kind of panned upon first release. People thought it was boring, whatever. But as we kind of go back and reference it, so it's like it absolutely is a cult classic.
I mean, kind of regarded as one of the greatest science fiction movies of all time. I mean, this movie, like you said, Pete, did not do very well, but then in like 2007, it made it on the top 100 AFI list of the greatest American movies of all time.
I think it was a lot for that when people started
definitely.
to revisit it and understand that there's a lot here. You know, the Battlestar Galactica reboot on the Sci-Fi Channel in 2004 really owes a lot to this movie.
Yeah.
That a lot of the language that was used in this, the very first Google phones before they were called Pixels were called Nexus. And that was completely from this. I think there was a lawsuit, in fact, because they called their phones Nexus, and that was pulled completely from this. And so just like Android phones and calling them droids and all that was kind of contentious with Lucas. Google calling their phones Nexus, they ultimately changed it, and I think they're Pixels now. But yeah, the early Google cell phones were called Nexus phones, and that was just like pulled directly from the replicants in this movie. And it's LA, man.
Yeah,
it's LA, baby.
True. Yeah, it's very true.
Like to think
a different type of LA for sure.
I like to think the Tyrell Pyramid is right off the 10. Would you say so?
That's what's so cool about this movie is that it's 1982 and it's 1982 futurists.
And I love all that shit.
Thinking about what 2019 would be like, and like wireless technology is not a thing.
Nope.
Personal communication devices are not a thing. There's fucking payphones with video calling on the street.
Very like 2001 A Space Odyssey. You're like, what the fuck? Like they had that. And for those who don't know, Pete and Scott, you're in LA, you know, you're very much an LA show. Yeah. So, I mean, that is probably also why you wanted to bring on this, because it is this like futuristic LA that is kind of right, but kind of not. And you're like, wait, what is this? I definitely had the question of like, why are there a lot of Asian people in this movie? Because I'm like, I know LA is like diverse and everything, but I was like, this also feels, and I think Scott, we talked on offline, you're like, yeah, it's kind of a mix of like Tokyo and LA. Is that what Ridley Scott wanted to do? I guess I was like, all right, I guess I buy it.
What he wanted to do was, Joss Whedon did the same thing with Firefly. You know, in the 70s and the 80s, China and Japan were thought of as these kind of like titans of industry. And I mean, not to get too like socio-political like weirdness, but they really thought
go ahead.
They really thought that China and Japan were going to be these like titans of the global commerce, and that pretty much it would kind of incorporate itself with American politics and culture, and that cities like Los Angeles and New York would just be kind of inundated with Asian culture and language and all of that. And so it's just so integrated into the landscape in this movie with the giant, 50-story billboards of like Asian women selling Coca-Cola or whatever. And if you watch Firefly, it's the same thing. The characters speak kind of a Chinese, like they have little words peppered in throughout. And so it's just their kind of like vision of, I mean, I think, obviously 2019 is come and gone.
Yeah.
And we're not wearing like severe shoulder pads.
We don't have the flying cars yet.
Yeah. Flying cars. But
one day.
Yeah, we'll get there. But, it's just, it was just an interesting take on, it was kind of like banking and business and where just kind of like commerce was going. And so all the big advertisements, well, the other thing is that a lot of the advertisements in this movie, besides Coca-Cola, are for companies that kind of went under. Yeah. There's like Atari and Sanyo and like these weird little 80s tech companies that were huge at the time, but then didn't really make it.
I mean, didn't everybody assume Atari would last through the 1980s?
I mean,
because I mean, what with those games, honey? Come on, honey! Oh my God! Right?
I'm still playing. I forgot what the jungle one was. We'll just say Frogger.
Okay, Frogger, gotcha. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, this movie is so interesting, and I have it playing in my background right now. You know, why not? Because it is very much about the vibes and all that. This movie also reminds me a little bit of like, I mean, I think this might have already been not out, but I think the manga had been out. But it reminds me a little bit of like Akira, kind of, sort of.
Absolutely.
Like,
Oh yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely. Mhm.
you know, with that whole Neo Tokyo vibe where it's like that, you know, but yeah, yeah, this movie's so interesting, and I'm glad I have you guys here to talk about it, since it does seem like something you enjoy and love. But as we normally do on the show, we will talk a little bit about some figures of the movie, talk about the production history, how does this movie get released, and what happened with it, and then also the legacy, and then we will talk about the plots, of sorts, and the characters and all that fun stuff. But let's get started. So this movie was released June 25th of 1982, which, if you're listening to this episode, we're going to be releasing this about a couple days after the release, so that's cool. This was directed by Ridley Scott. Was this his second movie, or did he do a movie before this, after Alien?
His debut movie was a movie called Duel from the 70s.
Yes.
And then
written by the guy who did Stir of Echoes, the book, and also his son helped create Bill and Ted, by the way. That's fun.
I love that. And then Alien. Alien,
amazing.
it's just huge sci-fi movie that we love. We have covered on our show, and that was in 1979. Obviously. And yeah, this was his big follow-up to Alien.
Yeah, for sure. Written by Hampton, Fancher, and David Peoples, the screenplay was, but this was based off of a Philip K. Dick novel, and produced by Michael Dealey. We're looking at a budget of about $28 to $30 million, depending on who you ask. We're looking at a gross US and Canada box office of about $32,914,489, and then a gross worldwide, because it did get a worldwide release, of $41,722,424. I'm kind of wondering if the worldwide release also was later on. I don't know if this was released worldwide everywhere in 82, but who knows, maybe. 89% on Rotten Tomatoes for the tomato meter, what the critics think, and then the audience scores a 91%. It is certified fresh. We've done a couple movies that are certified fresh. I don't always remember them. I know Bill and Ted was one of them. So we then have an 8.1 out of 10 on IMDb, and then a Letterboxd score of 4.1 out of 5. And then we have our cast of characters as normal. We have Harrison Ford as Rick Deckard. We have Rutger Hauer as Roy Batty. Sean Young, wonderful, lovely lady, as Rachel. Edward James Olmos, Selena's father, to me as Gaff. Emmett Walsh as Bryant. Daryl Hannah as Pris. Joanna Cassidy as Zora Salome, William Sanderson as JF Sebastian, the old guy with that weird apartment that he has, Brian James as Leon, Joe Turkel from The Shining as Alden Tyrell, and then James Hong as Hannibal Chu, Morgan Paul as David Holden, and then High Pike as Taffy Lewis. Just to talk about the characters a little bit, I mean, the ladies in this movie, as you said, Scott, are peak.
They're my favorite.
They're so good. Sean Young, I'm looking at her right now. She looks so goddamn good with this hair and everything. She's so great.
We were talking about the hair.
Oh my God.
It's amazing.
It's incredible.
Rachel is just every night she's going to bed with a bonnet on and
goals.
She has completely wrapped up in toilet paper.
Teasing that hair.
A mama, Thelma Harper, little bonnet.
Yes. Love it. It's so good. And then Daryl Hannah, pre-splash, I think, maybe, kind of, sort of.
Yes, absolutely.
Also doing I also just found out she technically has autism. I didn't know that. I was that's kind of interesting, but
that makes a lot of sense.
Doesn't it?
Makes sense. It makes sense that she's on the spectrum.
Yeah, I love her though. She's fucking amazing. Although when she did a Walk to Remember, her face did scare me just a little bit. But it's okay. She got fillers and it, didn't work that one time. Anyway. And as I said, Edward James Olmos, I know he was in this movie, but he's always going to be Selena's dad to me. Okay, listen. You guys just covered Selena, I think, too. So it's
we did a Selena episode. Yep.
Amazing. Jennifer Lopez, why did you not get an Oscar for that? I think she might have been nominated. I don't remember.
Absolutely not nominated.
Nope.
Whatever. God damn it. I can dream. And then, of course, because I have covered it a couple weeks ago, I'm right on top of that, Rose. I mean, Joanna Cassidy's in this.
Joanna Cassidy. Do you know the whole thing about the director's cut of Joanna Cassidy's scenes, and we were talking about it earlier.
Oh, we could talk about it later when we talk about the cuts.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sure.
I want to hear about this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then the guy from The Shining, bartender from The Shining, is in this movie too. Fun. And then Harrison Ford. I mean, he's cool. I don't mind him. I'm not an Indiana Jones person or whatever he did. I don't
80,
know.
like early 80s.
Whatever he did.
Early
Just,
80s.
You know, Harrison Ford, those little movies that he did. Just
Early
Star Wars.
80s Harrison
Just like
Ford.
Raiders,
Oh my God.
right.
I get it. Like, he made this movie back to back with Raiders.
He made this movie back to back with Raiders of the Lost Ark, in between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this man can buy and sell you and not even blink. Like,
That's fine. He can do a few other things too. Why not?
That is completely okay with me. Harrison Ford is he's kind of a grizzled old man these days.
Yeah.
But it's like, fuck it, man. Did you just hear the list of movies we just said?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and these are not cult
good.
movies by any means. These are huge popcorn for the people movies. And for him to go from Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, I mean, Rutger Hauer, I'm sorry. Ridley Scott now is obviously this prestige director, and like people give their left nut to be in like Gladiator 2. But like 1982, Alien was a success, and it changed the way we looked at sci-fi movies, much the way Star Wars did. But he was still kind of not unproven, but still kind of like, okay, he's that new kid.
He was a commercial art director that just turned into directing features,
doing these Chanel like perfume commercials.
And it's a weird genre movie too.
That's what I'm saying. Yep. So for Harrison Ford, who's coming from a handful of genre movies, but done by the biggest directors in Hollywood that are getting the biggest releases and like changing the landscape of blockbusters, for him to say, okay, I'm going to do this weird, grimy robot movie in London with this guy that came from commercials and does kind of avant-garde, like slow paced, quiet sci-fi thrillers. Sure. Yeah. I'll do that on my break between
why not?
Like, billions of dollars.
And the shoot was supposed to be a bitch, and he really didn't enjoy doing it, just because I think it was just a really tough shoot that he did not enjoy doing too.
Right. Right.
No, I was gonna say, I mean, I don't know if Ridley Scott is like difficult or whatever. I don't know about that, but yeah, this seems like it'd be tough. There's a lot of moving pieces to create something like Blade Runner.
Yeah. I don't think he has the reputation of like a James Cameron of like being tyrannical on set or anything like that. But I do think that he does he has a reputation of being a little bit of a perfectionist.
Yes. He's very technical,
but he knows what he's doing. And, but yeah, even so, it's like shooting predominantly at night, shooting with all these extras and flying cars and, you know, crazy costumes and all that stuff. It's just gonna be grueling.
Pete, do we want, or I don't know where the conversation is going, but do we want to talk a little bit about when we first watched this movie?
Pete, you can talk about that.
Yeah. Do you have memories of first watching this? I don't think I've ever asked you that.
No, I feel like I bought the VHS of the theatrical release. No, it wasn't the theatrical release. It was the first kind of recut.
The first recut in the early 90s? Okay.
Yeah, I bought that on VHS in my, like, I'm going to Tower Records and buying a bunch of movies days. And I just knew that it was important. It always had a reputation. Now, at this point, I'm in high school, late high school, early college, and it had a reputation for being just kind of like, you need to see this movie. It's important sci-fi. If you like sci-fi, you know, it's cool. It had a reputation for being just very cool. And I was just like, okay, I will buy this movie sight unseen, watch it, and I'm going to fall in love with it. I always did have a little bit of trouble with the pacing. Visually, I always knew that this fucking movie is like, it was like nothing I'd ever seen before. And I was just immediately like, holy shit, this is so fucking cool. And then not long after that, we get The Fifth Element. And I was like, and I appreciated it. I know at the time, a lot of people were kind of off and on with The Fifth Element. Some people thought
I have kind of mixed feelings about The Fifth Element myself,
or whatever. But I mean, at the time, I was like,
I'm a defender. I love it.
Yeah,
I am such a defender.
Mean, now I think nowadays it has a really great reputation because people grew up with it, and people who were kids when it came out are now adults, and they're just like, it's the best movie ever for my child to find my childhood. But being a teenager or being like a young adult at the time and being into film, there was a lot of people who were just like, what in the Blade Runner wannabe nonsense is this? Because it was bright, it was sunny, you know, it was like bright colors and all this stuff. But to me, I was like, give me all of this shit. Give me the Jean Paul Gaultier, sexy ladies working at the McDonald's drive-thru. I don't give a fuck. I'm here.
And the stewardesses. I can't stop with the stewardesses. I swear to God, like they're so good.
Everybody in The Fifth Element is a supermodel, and I'm okay with that. I don't have a problem with every background character being a runway model, and that is like a fact. It's not even an exaggeration.
No, seriously, they all are. No, really, they all are. Like, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Totally.
Okay with it. But you know what? Something about Blade Runner that Ridley Scott actually kind of takes credit for. But he's like, you know, when you watch Blade Runner and you watch the scenes of like just culture and things going on, when he goes to a bar to like do some detective work and like track down somebody, and he's in like a nightclub and all the women are wearing hats with veils, and Rachel has this very severe Joan Crawford look and all of that. Ridley Scott's like, you know what was big in the 80s? Shoulder pads.
Do you know what began to show up on runways? Shoulder pads.
Yeah. There you go. I know.
A fucking Dynasty 1930s throwback look. Guess who started that shit? Me, bitch. Ridley Scott is in your face about like my costume design for this movie inspired Dynasty.
Costumes done by Michael Kaplan. Really good.
Because this is 1982, and by later 80s, that's when like all that shit finally trickled down to popular culture, and like, you know, so it kind of stands to reason that he could be right.
Yeah, he could be right. Yeah. I love with him, Ridley Scott, too. He was on a round table on one of those like fucking Hollywood Reporter or whatever. He did say, they asked him about like, what do you think is like one of the greatest movies? And he literally said Muriel's Wedding. And I was like, you know what? That's right, Ridley Scott. Right. You better do it, bitch. Like, yes.
Well,
I love that.
Look at Ridley's career. He's like Martin Scorsese, that he directs all types of movies. I mean, he just doesn't do hard sci-fi. He does action movies. He does, empowering feminist, like road trip movies, like Thelma and Louise. So he's kind of all across the board. He does everything. So this is kind of a good segue of when I discovered this movie. Please. So this is a little insight of dorky Scott when I was 16 years old, and I was in speech and drama. That I feel like Ridley Scott was kind of my introduction to this movie, because he's a director that I think, outside of people clearly like Steven Spielberg or George Lucas, he was kind of the first auteur director that I really latched onto, and I sought out all of his movies. And when I was a junior in high school, I did an expository speaking presentation for speech and drama.
You better do it, forensics. You better do it, bitch. I know that's right.
On the filmography of Ridley Scott, just because I was so like into his movies, and I went back to all of his older catalogs, and of course Blade Runner was one. And my stepdad is really into film, and he was like, "Oh yeah, Scott, Blade Runner is where it's at." I saw that movie when it came out. I know that it wasn't very liked at the time, but I thought it was fucking awesome. So I watched it with my stepdad. And it's one of those things that even to this day, that when I watch this movie, it's still sometimes really hard to take in, but it just looks so fucking cool. And I think that was kind of my experience when I was 16 years old watching it. I would have had to have rented the early 90s director's cut.
Yeah.
Like the first kind of edition of that.
They took out the voiceover.
I think that it would have had to have been that. And I remember renting it from our local video store that I later worked at. And yeah, like just thinking it was so cool. And then I remember when I was in college, the version that we all watch now, the director's cut, which we'll talk about later, 2007, that comes out. I remember renting that. But yeah, Ridley Scott, I always kind of have a soft spot for Ridley Scott. Even his kind of bad movies like Exodus, Gods and Kings, I'll still sit down and watch it. Like, I am not too good for it. I drug Pete to The Last Duel a few years ago, opening weekend.
Oh, we did see that.
And that movie did not do that well. I saw it. I really liked it. And I mean, you got to give this guy credit. I mean, he's in his 80s. He has like Napoleon coming out at the end of the year with Joaquin Phoenix, and he's making Gladiator 2, a movie that he made over 20 years ago. So, I mean,
exactly.
I think just that, I think that type of work ethic with a director is just so cool. And yeah, I mean, he completely changed the landscape of science fiction with this movie.
I can totally agree with that. I completely I see what you're saying for sure, because like, yeah, like you said, like, I mean, before this, you did have like, obviously like Star Wars became big, and I think a lot of the sci-fi before this, especially, was very much like the creature feature, like alien stuff, kind of, sort of like in the horror sphere, maybe.
Yeah.
And when you get something like this and like Close Encounters of the Third Kind and stuff like that, you're really getting into like this sort of sci-fi bit, but yeah, no. And I'm also somebody who, I'm not exactly the biggest of Star Wars people. So, I mean, talked about it on the Fifth Element episode, but like also I'm just like, okay, whatever. But yeah, I can see myself more so going to something like maybe a Blade Runner or maybe like a Fifth Element, to where that's like futuristic space stuff to me, you know what I mean? As opposed to this super whatever opera thing, that is owned by a mouse. But anyway,
I also think probably what got this movie made, of course, was this wild success of George Lucas's Star Wars. And I would imagine that when Ridley Scott pitched this movie to Warner at the time, who was probably, I don't know, like, this movie's expensive. I know that science fiction is really hot right now, but what makes this movie stand out to something like Star Wars? And I think that it's its neo-noir take of that. When you really boil down this movie, it's an old cop story. I mean, it's a noir from the 40s or the 50s. And I think that juxtaposed to this crazy world that it takes place in is really fascinating too.
Yeah, totally.
You get, like, all of those elements. You get the cop story. You get a detective trying to track these people down. You get the femme fatale. We kind of have femme fatales in this movie.
Kind of a love story a little bit too between her, Rachel and Harrison Ford's character. Yeah, for sure. Some of the critical response quotes I pulled, so I have 3 of them. I always like reading the bad ones because those are the most fun ones. So we have Ginger Varney from LA Weekly, over a year away, saying, one of the more imaginative and less realized movies of this or any year. Scott directs it as if he were a director about to deliver some great conception, and never once notices that this mountain of a movie is giving birth to little more than a mouse. That's a lot. Okay, anyway. Ralph Novak from People magazine states, they all plod along with sometimes dazzling, sometimes boring special effects whiz, and Ford's climactic confrontation with Hauer approaches. Instead of tension building, though, things are grinding to a halt, including Hauer's gears. And then we have Devin Faraci from Chud, who states, projected in digital form with booming, all-encompassing sound, Blade Runner, the final cut, which is the one I watched, is a marvel of technology and dedication. As a film, it's still the same dead-eyed pretty girl who looks good on your arm, but is a real bore over dinner. So, yeah, I mean, there's people who love and hate it, obviously, but that's fine. That's what we're here for, and that's what I'm here to cover. But we'll talk a little bit about how did this movie actually come to be. Now, before I move on with what I have, do you guys have anything about how did this story come to be that you would want to share before I go into anything about mine?
I mean, I just think that it's so noteworthy that Ridley Scott pulled in the people that he did to create this movie, using these people that are like referred to as like futurists to come up with the look of it, and to design all those like downtown LA street scenes. It's like they built all that.
Yeah.
Like on a lot in the UK, and so he just brought in the right people, brought in people that were visionary, like him, coming from commercial directing. And I mean, he did the Apple 1984 like iconic commercial, you know what I mean? Like, so just the fact that he brought in all of these people, Douglas Trumbull,
science fiction icon.
Yeah. To create this world with him was, I think, just kind of part of the legacy of just how, the right people were brought in to create it and give it this look that it doesn't look like a Roger Corman movie, and it's like, I love Roger Corman movies. I love,
of course,
shitty, 70s and 80s Roger Corman sci-fi. Battle Beyond the Stars is like a favorite, but Battle Beyond the Stars looks like trash, like especially compared to this.
Of course it does.
Star Wars.
There's no
movies.
space battles in this movie, but it's still there's still flying cars. You know?
I would imagine that probably
shit.
with Warner Brothers at the time, it was probably we need something to compete with Star Wars over at Fox, and Return of the Jedi was about to come out. Empire was probably being made as they were developing this movie, and I think Warner just wanted in on that, and they wanted probably something different. Probably not quite what they expected with Ridley Scott's vision, because I know that this movie was sort of taken away with them of how they cut the end of this movie. But I think that it was just kind of, it was to compete with the market with Star Wars. And what I think is remarkable about Blade Runner is that you cannot really compare it with George Lucas at all, which I think is really cool. It's like both movies have a very different lived in science fiction feel. And they're just sort of, I mean, that's what makes Star Wars such an interesting movie, is that that's a movie that its universe feels very lived in. It feels very like rich. And Blade Runner's the same way, but they're two very different movies. So that's what I kind of think is like, how did this movie end up getting made?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. I was also talking about just the inception of it, but I love your guys' thoughts on it too. Did you also know that with Battle Beyond the Stars, did you know that a young Kathy Griffin is in there, like as one of the extras on like the planet?
You can find a photo of her.
You can. She's on there. Like, I just think that's so fun. And she mentioned it in her book. She was like, yeah, I was in, y'all ever see Fade to Black? You ever see that?
Fade to Black?
I don't know.
You never watched it?
It's called Fade to Black?
Yeah. So this is a horror movie from the 80s. Okay. And it's you've seen the It miniseries from ABC, right?
Oh, the It miniseries. I was like,
yeah.
I didn't hear.
So the guy, one of the guys in that, he plays a young guy who is obsessed with horror movies, and he's like kind of this put upon, bullied guy a little bit, and he goes and kills these people, and he dresses up like different horror movie characters. And there's a whole thing at the end of the movie where he like King Kong wise like falls off of Grauman's Chinese Theater. Very much an LA movie. You might as well like it if you are oddly to live there. But apparently Kathy Griffin is also in there too as an extra, because she talked about how she was in that, Battle Beyond the Stars, stuff like that as an extra, which I thought was kind of fun. But yeah, go watch Fade to Black, everybody. It's on Shudder, and you can find it. And
from It, there he is.
There you go. So he's been in other stuff, but yeah, he's good. Also, Joanna Cassidy is on my screen right now with her tits out, and I'm here for it and love it. This is great.
Fully tits out this entire scene. I'm like, all right.
This is great. But anyway, so a little bit of the background of this. So, interested in adapting Philip K. Dick's novel, Do Androids Dream of Electronic Sheep? Martin Scorsese, yes. Electric Sheep, you're right. Anyway, so Martin Scorsese was actually interested in filming this, but he never optioned it. And really, other people were like interested in maybe making something out of this. I don't really know the book, to be honest. I don't know how like accurate it is to the book. Yeah, probably.
Different.
But
is
yeah,
Deckard
so
sort of the main character of the book?
Yes, Deckard is the main character, but it's just
right.
It's
Sure.
It's just,
it's just different. Right. But the screenplay by Hampton Fancher was optioned in 1977. So the producer, Michael Dealey, he became interested in this draft of the script. And he convinced Ridley Scott to actually film this. So Scott had previously declined this, but after he left the slow production of Dune, because I guess he was supposed to do that before, David Lynch got in there. But he wanted a faster paced project to kind of take his mind off of the fact that he just lost his brother, apparently. So he was like, all right, like, let me go and do something a little bit more quick. Whereas Dune's like this 2+ hour fucking thing. You know what I mean? So he joined the project in 1980, and he managed to, pretty much get a little bit more money from the studio, and yeah, like this script focused more on like the environmental issues, less on the issues of humanity and religion that were covered like in the book. And Scott wanted to change some stuff as well. So yeah, I mean, that all happened with there, and then they then ended up going to what was called the Lad Company, which was a part of Warner Brothers, which, if you don't know, in the beginning of this movie, literally there's like this whole tree that comes up, and it's like this electronic tree, and it's the Lad Company's logo, which I was like, is this part of the movie? Like, what the fuck? But anyway, so yeah, they brought They secured financing for this and brought it to them and were like, hey, let's do this. And also, this is the Lad Company, which is an American company, but it was also done by Sir Run Shaw, which is a Hong Kong production company. So technically, this is a co-production between America and Hong Kong, which is also maybe why there is this little bit of a Asian influence in there too, because it's also being produced by an Asian country, which I thought was kind of interesting. But yeah, so the author, though, Philip K. Dick, became concerned that no one had informed him that they were making a movie about his book, pretty much. So he criticized an early version of this script. And even though that guy died after this release, pretty soon after, he was apparently pleased by the rewritten script and, you know, all that kind of stuff. But, you know, I guess the author of the book wasn't really all that keen on it being made without his knowledge. But I guess he warmed up after he saw like, oh, okay, I guess this is like, okay. I guess you kind of get a little bit of what I'm trying to say, but you're doing your own thing with it.
I know that he was really into the casting of Harrison Ford as Deckard
Sure.
too. That was one of the things that he really approved of.
Ford also says, though, in the early 90s, he says, Blade Runner is not one of my favorites. I tangled with Ridley. You kind of mentioned that a little bit, too, that, like, he wasn't exactly keen on it. But he said when we started shooting, it was tactfully agreed that the version of the film that we agreed upon was the version without voiceover narration. And he said it was a fucking nightmare. And he thought that the film had worked without narration, which I guess is a part of these cuts that they would have as well. Since, again, literally this whole movie has like 5 different versions of it. Like, it's crazy. Let's, you know, that gives us a little bit of like, how did this movie actually literally come to be? But let's talk a little bit about just like, do you guys have anything about like the filming or the casting of this? Of like, how did they come to get on Harrison Ford and Rutger Hauer to play these like main characters of it or anything like that?
Well, I know that Rutger Hauer was probably a personal choice from Ridley Scott, just because I think that he had just probably...
He saw him in his Danish movies.
He saw him in his Danish movies that he had made with Paul Verhoeven, which if you have never seen the Danish Paul Verhoeven movies like Turkish Delight,
wild.
they are
Oh my God.
wild. You see every single inch of Rutger Hauer's body in Turkish Delight, and it is crazy. Rutger Hauer, I mean, what just a screen presence in this movie. He's so, like, his body at the end, at that end fight scene, of just, you just see how jacked he is, just like running after Harrison Ford.
Rutger Hauer in this movie, I always, as a teenager, as a young guy, I was like, sometimes he looks great, sometimes he looks really weird.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
like the bleach blonde hair, I think, especially for 1982, like punk is kind of emerging into like popular culture. And Rutger Hauer is he Dutch? Is he from Holland?
He's Dutch. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's
So,
European.
I mean, he's like Scandinavian guy. So it's like for him to be like blonde is one thing, but for him to be, you know, bleach blonde like this, platinum, that's a very like early 80s like punk influenced look. And a lot of the, you know, the culture at large is not, you know, accustomed to see nowadays, you know, whatever. Nowadays, people look crazy and no one thinks twice, bats an eye. But I mean, for, you know, the American public to see this man who is not a movie star in the States, you know, play this role and look this way, and he looks absolutely insane. Daryl Hannah tells a story about auditioning for Pris, and it was told to her that the character is a robot and that this is a science fiction movie. And she said that she was kind of concerned about how to go to the audition and to present herself. And she was into like punk music as well. So she did a very like punk look. She said she liked Adam Ant and, you know, this like new romantic scene. And so she drew a big black line across her eyes like Adam Ant would do, and very like Native American inspired, and like ratted out her hair and tore up her clothes and went in a very like punk. She's like, this is the future. This is a robot from the future. And she said she went in and all the girls had like glitter makeup and star earrings and their hair was crimped in this very early 80s idea of what a robot should look like, doing a very like Mega Made, like dot matrix kind of a thing. And she was like, what the fuck did I just walk into? And I mean, ultimately she got the part. You know, the girls with the like glitter eyeliner and like, you know, blue lipstick didn't quite fit the idea of what Rutger Hauer was doing. And when they saw her, Daryl Hannah's like, what, 5'10", 5'11"?
Yeah.
She's a statuesque woman, and they were like, okay, what do you got? What can you do? And she's like, I know gymnastics.
Yeah, I can do backflips.
I can do some backflips. And they're like, oh, this bitch. And then they used it, and so
yeah, why not? It's great.
Movie.
Yeah, Pris is such a crazy character because she's another one where it's like, it's Daryl Hannah. So obviously she looks really good and really cool, but that wig is insane.
Yeah.
And it just gets more and more crazy as the movie goes along. And finally,
it's wild.
In her confrontation at the very end, it is like completely electrocuted Phyllis Diller, like out of control.
Yeah. So one of my favorite things about this movie is the real life locations that they flipped, that they made to Los Angeles in 2019. And whenever Pete and I walk the precinct, we walk right where Daryl Hannah is introduced. And I always think of it. So whenever we walk down
Broadway,
right when we walk down Broadway.
Because you are Pris, Scott. You specifically are just like walking.
I mean, the precinct, which is a big gay bar here in LA, they're doing all the drag con stuff this weekend. As a matter of fact, as we're recording this, that's like headquarters for all the girls. All the dolls are doing all the drag con stuff at precinct. It is on Broadway and 4th. The Bradbury building where JF Sebastian and Daryl Hannah and all that shit goes down is on Broadway and 3rd. It's a block away.
It's right on the corner.
And the building, the exterior is there, and the interior looks, minus the trash. There's just a Subway sandwiches at the bottom of the first floor.
And they put up these really cool giant columns right out front, which I love.
Yeah.
And you kind of see those similar columns in Ridley Scott's Legend too. So the guy has a thing for columns. Look at these columns.
Look at these columns.
But yeah, I always think of that really sad shot of Daryl Hannah getting underneath her little bed of trash like a little homeless lady. I always think of that scene when I walk by.
Yeah. I'm not really sure how Rachel came to be in this.
Sean Young.
But Sean Young was very hot at the time.
Yep.
She was in Dune. Was she the Zendaya of the 82? I don't know. But she was in Dune. She played that role.
I don't really know what work she had before Blade Runner too.
Yeah, but she was just she just ultimately became a very big genre actress of the early 80s.
She was in Stripes with Bill Murray.
Oh,
that was kind of big breakout.
There she was just walking down the street. Yeah. Love that.
Yeah.
And I mean, Daryl Hannah, you have to hand it to her. Not Daryl Hannah. I mean, also Daryl Hannah. She has a lot of science fiction street cred. But Sean Young, Blade Runner, Dune, Baby Secret of the Lost Legend,
Lost Dinosaur,
a movie that I used to love when I was a kid. But yeah, talk all the shit that you want about Sean Young. Those are some pretty iconic roles.
Yeah. And it's also a thing too, as well. Like people want to bring Sean Young with like, oh, how dare they do that to her at the end of Ace Ventura? And I'm like, sorry guys. Like, I'm sorry. It's a transphobic narrative a little bit like at the ending, but she's fabulous. Like, she's amazing. Like, but yeah, it's like, but who knows? Anyway, do you want to hear about some of the people who were going to be cast in this movie, or they were thought to be cast?
Sure.
As like Decker, Gene Hackman, that queen. Really? Okay.
Nope.
I guess.
Right. Sean Connery.
80s.
Yeah.
Okay, Sean Connery.
I don't know
Jack Nicholson.
what Sean Connery.
I don't know either. Jack Nicholson. So that would have been fun if like he and Joe Turkel were in this together, but that didn't work out. But Jack Nicholson, maybe.
It's kind of a science fiction. It's kind of a science fiction Chinatown. So
sure,
I get it.
See why they were. Yeah,
maybe a little
Paul Newman.
Long.
Yeah, maybe Paul Newman. It's fun. Clint Eastwood. I could have maybe seen that. It could have worked. Maybe, perhaps. Like him and Dustin Hoffman too was another one, I think. All three of these men, Harrison Ford, Clint Eastwood, and like Dustin Hoffman, they all remind me of each other. So I'm just like, oh, they're all the same person pretty much. Anyway, Tommy Lee Jones.
Tommy Lee Jones could have worked. He's angry.
Yeah. Schwarzenegger, but I think this would have been, I don't know, man. This is like right around Terminator, right? Like maybe
it's 2 years before Terminator.
Maybe. Well,
he was unproven as an actor speaking English lines that were not being overdubbed by a different actor. So that would have been
Peter Falk was another one.
Columbo.
Yes, Columbo. He would have been too old, though. I mean, really. But,
Even then,
I mean, he is supposed to be this detective, so you could age him up a little bit. I'm also seeing Harrison Ford with his shirt off right now, and that's also fun to look at, too. This is
looks
great.
amazing in this movie.
I mean, this is he got that jack body for Indiana Jones, especially
Yes,
for
he
Temple of
did.
Doom. Body by Jake.
Nick Nolte before his face changed. Okay,
I mean, there
maybe.
was a time that Nick Nolte was like
It was a hot commodity.
People's Magazine, Sexiest Man Alive of 91.
I know. He was. Don't get me wrong. Al Pacino. I don't know.
Now they're just naming every single actor that was
I
alive.
know. And then Burt Reynolds, which I would have thought would have been hilarious.
Mr. Burt Reynolds as Decker. I mean, maybe.
I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
He's one of our greatest living actors, Pete.
I don't know about that.
Sure, exactly. Debbie Harry actually was offered the role of Pris.
Sure.
Listen, sure. Why not? Let's go with it. And then also, of course, we have, like we said, Joanna Cassidy's in here as Zora, who's like a stripper / like killer, replicant or whatever. Just fun. But yeah, all these different people. Let me see if there's anything about the filming of this movie. Or do y'all have anything about like any of the music in it? I know the music's kind of a big deal in this movie too.
I mean,
people love the score.
It's Vangelis. It's I think it's I don't know if it's the same year or the year before, but they did the score for Chariots of Fire.
Mm-hmm. Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah. Chariots of Fire is very like, it's iconic film music. Vangelis was a late 70s progressive rock instrumental artist. So it's not like that was like film score territory. So it was kind of like, okay, let's bring in this guy.
Yeah.
And so he did all the synthesized music. The score is so moody. We just bought it on vinyl a couple of months ago.
We own it on vinyl.
Bunch of hipsters. I love you for it, though.
It's really fun to listen to because it's a lot of this really moody, like synthesizer stuff, but then there's like some weird, like 30s, like old timey radio stuff thrown in the mix in there. Yeah. The score is pretty kooky, but it just adds to the whole like, vibe, like we said, of the film, and just this very dark and moody kind of like, I don't know, you're going out to like the grimy underworld of like.
Agreed. Yeah.
LA.
I love like Thomas Newman's like a really good like score person, John Williams, obviously, and all that. You know who I really enjoy, who we just covered it a couple weeks ago because we did Don't Tell Mom, The Babysitter's Dead, of course. But David Newman, I love his scores. His are so
the Newman
good.
Dynasty.
Oh, like they're so good. And so I guess him and Thomas are like somehow related, right? I guess they're brothers or some shit.
They're all related. Anyone that is a Newman that composes
anything,
movies, Randy Newman, Thomas Newman, David Newman, they're all related.
Yeah, which is fine because they're all so good. Like this did he did the 80s, like with Heathers, Don't Tell Mom, Bill and Ted, all that. And then Thomas Newman did a really good job because he did like the Angels in America soundtrack, which is fucking great, on the HBO miniseries. So, all right. Let's do a little something different on the show. So let's give like a baseline plot summary of this movie because for those not in the know, this movie has like different versions to it. So I want to give like a baseline of like, here's what the movie is actually about. And, Blade Runner for Dummies, I guess. Not that any of you are dummies, but just a little something. And then we can kind of talk about the different versions of this movie and how they all kind of differ a little bit. Sounds good?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So in your own words, because I've only watched this movie once and I have it currently playing in the background with Sean Young's hair out, which again, goals. But in your own words, what is this movie about? What happens in Blade Runner for the uninitiated?
Let me take this one.
Yeah.
I think Deckard is a cop in LA. It's the year 2019, but it's 2019 from 1982's point of view. So we have no cell phones. We have no wireless technology. We have a very analog version of tech. He's a retired cop, and he's specifically a retired Blade Runner. A Blade Runner is a cop who their sole job is to go out and hunt down and retire, which means murder, unalive, replicants. Replicants are robots that have been manufactured by people to look identical to people, but they've essentially become a slave kind of like caste
made specifically
in our society.
Made specifically by the Tyrell
They were
Corporation.
made by the Tyrell Corporation, one corporation.
I can also only imagine, and here's the thing too, I love your use of the word robot, because that just shows that you are a Futurama fan, and I appreciate that and love that about you. Anyway, continue.
So, the thing is, the replicants, they have a 4-year lifespan. After 4 years, they will shut down and cease to be. But the thing is, for some unknown reason, the Tyrell Corporation has created them with consciousness and a sense of self and a self-awareness, sentience. And so I think this brings up a lot of other like weird conversations, which it's like, yeah, we created them to like do our labor, but it's like you also gave them consciousness and self-awareness,
and you're shocked, shocked that they're like
that they don't want to die after 4 years,
that they don't want to die, and they are
and just
like,
be like
rebelling against all of this,
and just live on some shitty moon or like some shitty like freight spaceship like mining ore or whatever they're doing. So there has been a group of replicants. There are I think they said there were 5 or 6 of them that escaped their like mining ship. They made their way to Earth. They killed a couple of people, and they're on their way to find Tyrell to force him to extend their lives. And the cops they find Deckard, and they're like, "We need you to retire these replicants." And he's like, I'm done. I'm out. I'm not doing this anymore. And they're like, "Too bad. Doesn't matter. You have to do it." And so he's got to go and find these replicants. In the process, he goes to the Tyrell Corporation, meets Mr. Tyrell. He does the cool test to see if you're a replicant.
Yep. Love the test.
He meets Rachel, who he finds out is a replicant. She doesn't know it yet.
Pete, do you like our owl?
Do you like our owl?
Yes.
Of course
it is. I love Sean Young delivering that line.
Yeah. Yeah, she's great. So now we find out that Tyrell can make a replicant that does not know that it's a replicant and has been implanted with false memories. Why? Who knows? And so now
to torture them with that sentience you were just talking about.
Absolutely existentialism. So now Deckard is off to find and retire the rest of the replicants, and the main one is Roy Batty, played by Rutger Hauer, who is like, I guess he's the smartest of the ones that are left alive. And it's just Deckard's adventures through dirty future LA, trying to track down and kill these replicants for wanting to be alive longer. And, when we're watching it, we're just like, God, what did Joanna Cassidy do? Jeez,
right?
Jeez Louise. Like, fuck, man.
She just has her
I don't know.
She just has her little girly show at this cyberpunk bar with her replicant python.
Jeez Louise, like that's kind of rude. Yeah, it's kind of rough. It kind of brings up these questions of like, the other thing about the replicants is that they are so well designed. They have skin and blood and bones. They have to do like hardcore tests on the void comp test is a visual stimulus test, and it's questions and it's kind of like a lie detector kind of a test situation where he's taking notes, and it takes all these questions to do it. But also they can do tests on their bones or their bone marrow or whatever to find out. But otherwise, if you just look at one, you wouldn't know it was a replicant. They just have super strength and immune to pain and things like that, but you couldn't tell just by like, and that's the level of like sophistication that these robots have. So they're not even really robots, by scientific standards. You really shouldn't call them robots.
Yeah, because all of their insides are replicant from human organs, right?
Yes, yeah. They're genetically.
And they go into stuff like that. We haven't even talked about Blade Runner 29, but they go into
we'll talk a little bit about that. Yeah.
With the Jared Leto character.
Yeah.
Too.
So, Deckard finds Rachel, this female replicant that doesn't know she's a replicant. He knows this. And ultimately, does he tell her? Yeah, he tells her. But the thing is, he still falls in love with her. And that's where the big changes to this movie and the different versions are. The one big change is the voiceover versus no voiceover. That was really only the theatrical release, and the very first home video release came with the voiceover. And it doesn't really
add a lot.
Add anything.
I mean, it's kind of entertaining to hear Harrison Ford's checked out delivery, that you can tell that they got Harrison in the sound booth and he did not want to be there.
Yeah, he was tired as hell, man. He was being Harrison Ford, listen. Yes.
Yeah. And so the first version I got was minus the voiceover, but I think I don't remember what ending it had.
I want to say that my ending was the shots from The Shining, where you see
driving off into the forest.
Them driving off into the forest. Did you know that? I
didn't know that.
They got outtakes from Stanley Kubrick's The Shining when it's Jack and his family driving up to the overlook. I mean, it's Glacier National Park, and that's where they shot it in Montana. So that's why I always kind of knew that. That's the going to the Sun Highway. And,
fun fact for everyone. Fun fact for everybody. This gentleman here is from Montana, so he'll let you know about it. So yeah.
I always let people know about that. But yeah, and they cut in outtakes of that didn't make it into the movie.
I think
that was the first version that I watched.
Yeah. My one that I watched, because I've only watched the one on HBO, is the final cut. So that's the end
one
where yeah, it's the one where they him and Rachel, Decker and Rachel, they escape out and they have the unicorn thing. And that's how it ends in my version. But anyway, without further ado though, let's move on to some of these other prints that we had. So thank you for your plot summary, Scott.
It was very good, Pete.
It was really good. Like,
very good. That was a very good TV guide synopsis.
literally the quickest plot summary I've ever done on my show, because whether people like the beat to beat ones or whatever, that's fine. But yeah, this movie is just like, and like I was saying earlier, and like you said offline before, like this movie is so much about the vibes and just like how influential it was. Whereas the story, I mean, like you could dig into it, but it's more interesting to talk about the fact that this movie's had like 5 different endings.
And
anyway,
the other thing, on top of the different endings, is the different interpretations of the movie that we have now.
Yes.
Because the big question is Deckard himself a replicant?
Mm-hmm.
Does Deckard have Edward James Olmos' character, his memories implanted in him to become a good Blade Runner because Gaff walks with a limp and can't do his job anymore? Does Deckard know he's a replicant? All these questions are like out there to this day, like, still unanswered, still kind of people arguing about. And so it's like, that's why this movie is so much more than just like, and then this happens, because
exactly. Yes. No, it's true.
There's a lot to cover,
Yeah. So the first one that I know of, from my list I have is the work print version, which was shown to audiences in Denver and Dallas in 82. It was also seen in 90 and 91 in Los Angeles and San Francisco as an original director's cut without the approval of Ridley Scott. So this had some negative responses to it, and there were positive responses to it in 90 to 91. So when it first came out, people were like, what the fuck is this? And then as time went on, they're like, oh, okay, this is like, all right, I guess. But this version was also re-released as part of the 2007 big like ultimate edition that they did. But again, they still say the result of this was rough. So the first one was the work print of this was like, here you go. Right? So that's the first. Then you have the San Diego sneak preview. This was only shown one time in 1982. And this is pretty much like the US theatrical version, except that it has 3 additional scenes that were not in it before. And these are not a part of the final cut version. And this includes a scene introducing Batty in a video phone booth, a shot of Deckard reloading his gun after Batty breaks his fingers, which he does like near the end of the movie, I think. And then a scene where Deckard and Rachel ride into the sunset. So that's the second one that only people in San Diego in 1982 saw, which again, it wasn't part of the final cut or anything. I'm sure it's on some sort of special features or something. Then we get into the 82 US theatrical release, this is what everyone saw in the theaters in 1982. Included the happy ending as well as the voiceover that you guys are talking about. As well. So yeah. Do you guys have anything to talk about when it comes to the US theatrical release of anything that you want to add?
I mean, yeah, like we said, the voiceovers doesn't really add too much.
No.
It kind of, spells some things out, but I feel like if you're paying attention, you'll kind of get that. Or if you on multiple viewings, you'll get those things without the voiceover. And then the happy ending, like you said, is after Deckard retires all the replicants, he goes home to his crazy Frank Lloyd Wright apartment in the sky, and Rachel is there. They meet, and he's like, "Okay, let's get the hell out of here." And they get in the car, in his weird little sci-fi car, and just drive through the forest in the distance. And she's talking to him in the car. There's a couple of lines of dialogue, not a lot. And she's just like, she knows she's a replicant at this point. She knows the memories are not hers. And I think she asks him, like, did we know each other? Did we know each other before? I think she asks. And then I think he says yes. And then it just like cuts to them like driving, like smiling. And then like there's like aerial footage of them driving down the highway. And then that's it.
Yeah.
I don't know how that's any happier than what we get in the later endings and the final cut endings. It's just right before they get into the car, the elevator doors close.
Yeah.
And then that's
pretty much.
I mean, you don't need the car stuff.
But I don't think you need the car stuff.
And that's kind of what Ridley Scott came to the conclusion of when he did the 2007 cut, which, I mean, for all intents and purposes, that's Blade Runner.
Yeah.
Like, and ask any sort of fan of this movie, they'll cite the 2007.
The final cut is where we need to really get into the differences and the additions. And not so much the subtractions of what they took out, but what they added in.
Yeah, true. So then after this, though, you have the international theatrical release, which is the same year. It has more violent scenes in there than the US theatrical cut because the Europeans and international people could take it more, I guess. So that was that. US broadcast version, so that was shown on TV, obviously just had like the titties and profanity taken out of it pretty much. And then we will talk about the director's cut, I guess. We can talk a little bit about that, but let's talk about this 2007 cut you guys are talking about, which technically I believe is referred to as the final cut. Is that right?
Yeah.
The final cut. Yeah, absolutely.
So we'll talk a little bit about that.
Too. He says it's his best version of the movie and the one that he's most proud of.
Yeah. And I think that's the only one you need to watch. If you've never seen it, it's not like, I got to watch the original theatrical because that's the first version. Don't even worry about it. Like,
just watch, just watch the final cut.
It was taken away from him at that point. So yeah, but the final cut now, it looks great. It's beautiful. It's like, if you have HBO Max, and you're watching it on a nice TV, it's a beautiful it's a beautiful cut of the movie. It's in 4K. And you get all the cool unicorn shit.
Are you all that familiar with the unicorn stuff of the origami unicorn?
No, I don't know what it means.
Okay,
Please tell me.
So kind of midway through the movie, Deckard has this dream, or he's thinking about this vision of this unicorn. And it's kind of like storybook unicorn going through the forest. And why is that there? And then you start to see at the end, especially when he picks up the origami unicorn and the Edward Jones almost character, Pete, you were saying.
So throughout the movie, this character, that Edward James almost plays, his name is Gaff. Gaff is another Blade Runner. He did the same job as Deckard. He's the one that finds Deckard at the beginning and says, you need to go see the captain. And he's there with him as he's doing detective work. Gaff he's got a limp. He's got a cane. He walks very, very slow. What's really kind of interesting is that he's speaking a different language. He's not speaking Chinese. He's speaking what they're calling in the movie city speak, which is kind of like, what was that made up language that was like kind of based in Navajo or whatever? Esperanto. It's kind of like Esperanto, but it's not Esperanto. It was developed for the movie. It's called city speak. And so he's speaking this weird thing at the beginning, and then Deckard's responding in English. Gaff's big thing is that in all the scenes he's in, whatever happens in the scene, he makes a little origami piece and drops it there. So when Deckard is talking to the police chief, and the chief is saying, you got to go back out there, and Deckard's like, I'm retired, I'm not going back. You see Gaff picks a little piece of paper out of an ashtray, and then he makes a little origami chicken. And it's like,
calling him chicken.
Deckard's scared to go back to work. Then like he sees something else, or I think it's when he first is looking at, I forget when he does it. I think he finds the pictures of Zora. He makes a little man out of a matchstick.
Yeah.
And the man's got like a heart on. The little matchstick man has a dick. if you like watch closely. And then later on in the movie, when he goes back to his apartment and finds Rachel, Gaff has been there. And when Rachel leaves, she kind of knocks something over, and it's a little origami unicorn. And he picks it up off the ground and he sees that it's a unicorn, and he kind of thinks back to this daydream that he had earlier in the movie. And the thing is, the question is, did Gaff know that he had a daydream about a unicorn? And how would Gaff have known about the daydream? And some theories are that Gaff knew because it was his daydream about the unicorn. And that's why Gaff is so kind of like not friendly with Deckard. Because one fan theory is that Gaff was the like number one Blade Runner in LA, and that something happened and he was injured. And now he can't quite really do his job anymore. He's got this cane, he's got this limp. And so they've taken his memories of retiring replicants, implanted them into the Deckard replicant so that he would have this knowledge of how to be the best Blade Runner in town and to go off and now do his job. And so that's why Gaff is so like kind of distant with him, because he's mad that he's taken his career away from him. And so he leaves these little origami things to taunt him. And so he left the unicorn saying kind of like, I know what you are, right? Is that real? I don't know.
Also, all of the human characters in this movie that aren't replicants, there's something wrong with them. Tyrell has his big glasses, so he has poor eyesight. There's who's the actor from the Bradbury that finds?
Oh yeah, J.F. Sebastian.
J.F. Sebastian has the weird aging thing.
He's got Methuselah syndrome. His character is 25 years old, but he's like got wrinkles and he looks like an old man. And Pris is like, "What's wrong with you?"
So like all of these human characters, there's just something
they're afflicted with
something, and all of the replicants are just sort of, they're perfect humans.
They're built for a job, so they're physically kind of like, you know, better than more human than humans, what Mr. Terrell says. So that's another thing. And then the other big clue is the eye reflections.
Yeah.
That, you know, like, I don't know if you have like a cat or a dog, and sometimes when you see like,
of course, I have a little kitty right here.
Light reflected right in their eyes. They get that thing in the back of their eye where you can see that crazy reflection, you know.
They do it with everyone.
Oh my God, they're demons.
Yeah. So they do it with all the replicants in the movie.
Even the owl.
Even the owl.
Yep.
They do it with Deckard in the scene.
Yes, they do.
So you're like, you can see the glow of his eyes. Yeah. So it's like, okay, well, that right there to me says he is a replicant, but
yeah,
I don't know. It's still ambiguous. They still never spell it out in the movie that yes, he is, other than these context clues of the reflection in his eyes and the dreams. But also the Gaff making the unicorn origami could be a coincidence. I don't know. Deckard could have told him about just these dreams that he had. You know, are there replicant unicorns out there somewhere because all the animals are extinct and they're making these replicant animals like the owl and the snake and all that? When you see these shots of the city, sometimes like there's a shot and there's a guy that just has like a falcon on his arm. And then there's a shot of just somebody like pulling like a llama. And you're like, what the fuck? They're just in the middle of the city and people have these crazy animals. But that's another context clue. That's from the book, is that animals are extinct and they're a status symbol now.
Yeah.
It's like having a Tesla is like, I got a fucking llama.
Yeah. Totally.
I got this cool great horn owl.
I can afford it. You know, it's like, of course Tyrell can afford it. He makes them, but like for just average people to have, you know, your girly show, but I've also have a snake in my girly show. It's like, okay, that's an
exactly
of why she's cool, you know, because these are status symbols, and these are just other little context clues that are thrown in there and not explicitly spelled out. So that just kind of like adds to like the lore of this movie and the mythology that's in there, and not having to know the source material, but just kind of culling it from multiple watchings of just how layered this
it's so beautifully layered. Like I pick up on something different each time, and it's also one of those movies that sometimes it's main story. I get this with a lot of movies that I'll forget sometimes minor plot details. So when I'm watching it, it's like I'm watching it for the first time, just because the movie is so beautifully layered. It's something that Blade Runner 2049, which we can talk a little bit about, carries over really well. It still keeps that ambiguous quality about it that they never specifically say that Decker is a replicant.
Yeah.
And kind of that movie itself is also very layered in its plot.
Both of these movies is that they present this fully realized world that we're just kind of plopped into.
Mm-hmm.
And you as the audience, you're just supposed to keep up.
You just have to keep up.
This world is going, it's moving, it's living, all these people are here, and we're just showing you this episode of what's going on. And there's a little title card at the beginning with some text, not very long. And then, you're just like, okay, keep up. If you're not paying attention, then just watch, and maybe you'll get it, maybe you won't, but you're still cool either way. One last thing I want to talk about as far as the different cuts of the movie is when they created the final cut, they asked Joanna Cassidy in 2007 to come in for reshoots. There are shots when Zora is being retired, when she's running through the city, and especially when, spoiler alert, when she's shot and her character runs through windows. She runs through glass in like a store or something. And in the previous versions of the movie, it is very clearly a stunt double.
I don't think I've ever actually seen these versions where it's the stunt double.
I've got the DVD. We can pull it up.
I guess I would have had to on my VHS then.
You would have had to.
Mm-hmm.
The wig is bad. The wig is not good. It is like awful. It's like a little orphan Annie, little afro. They're very blatant shots of her face. And it's like, that's a man, Maury. That is not
right.
Joanna
Exactly.
Cassidy at all, And so they brought her in, they put her in a rig, on this big rig in front of a green screen, and like had her do all these like spun her around and like
some lady in her 40s at this point, which is crazy. Joanna Cassidy
in 2007 was like in her 50s, I think.
Seriously, seriously.
Yeah. And they have her in a rig, and she's wearing the full like green suit, just her face is exposed, and hair, because they're completely redoing the hair. So I think it's a full head replacement. So what they did was, and there's footage of it on the DVD or the Blu-ray, if you buy that too, of the final cut, because they show the behind the scenes of her coming in, and she's just like, sure, yeah, I'll do it, whatever. And so, so they did full head replacements. So the wig is better. It matches her, and there's shots, and you're just like, there's her face. And so they just dropped those in to just kind of zhuzh it up. She got her zhuzh. So
it was probably shots that were really bothering Ridley Scott too.
They really bothered me.
Really bothered both of you.
They were so blatantly not her, and it's just like, okay, they had to, it's a hard stunt. She's running through glass, I know. A stunt.
Well, she's dying, right?
Person,
exactly.
Yeah. So it's like, it's a tough get, and they were not going to ask, of course, Joanna Cassidy to do this, no matter how safe it was. And it was the 80s. So it's like they could only do so much with effects and faking all that stuff. So it was what it was, and it was in the movie. And so at the time, 2007, they're like, okay, we can do this. Joanna Cassidy, her face, it works. So those are the shots that you see now when you watch the final cut. You see with the face and the head replacement.
We got to see this at Hollywood Forever Cemetery in front of an audience, and Joanna introduced it.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And she's just like, I don't know what version you're watching, but if it's the 2007 one, that's the one that I had to come back in for reshoots for. It was very cute.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
God, what a goddamn icon. She's Brenda Chenoweth's mom. She's Rose from Don't Tell Mom. Like, she's just so fucking great.
Yeah.
I love her. Is she like also, not that I'm just an idiot sometimes, but I also feel like part of me thinks like, is she related to David Cassidy from like the fucking Monkees?
I mean, hey.
Or is she like Katie Cassidy's mom, but she's not? I'm just like, where are all these people? Can you imagine? Can you imagine Joanna Cassidy being Katie Cassidy's mom? That would be so cunt.
A lot of
Although technically David Cassidy is like her dad, technically, but whatever, it's fine.
a lot of famous Cassidy.
Exactly. But anyway, so wrapping up a little bit, nothing too crazy. I do want to talk about Blade Runner 2049 because I have not seen it, but I'd love for you guys to talk about it.
Sure.
And then also talking a little bit about how has this movie influenced other films and what the legacy it's had, really. And then I think that'll be a nice little wrap up to our show.
I mean, Blade Runner 2049, surprise, surprise, when it came out in 2017, it did not do that well at the box office just because this is hard sci-fi. That is a very difficult sell for a mainstream audience. And you know what? I totally get it. I totally get if this movie is not your thing because it is very dense and it is, I mean, some people just don't really they're not really along for the ride of the movie, which is fine. And Blade Runner 2049 is kind of the same exact thing. And I think that movie also kind of is going to get the cult status that the 82 movie had just because I feel like people are kind of ride or die for Blade Runner 2049. I mean, it won a bunch of technical Oscars. It got its cinematographer, Roger Deakins, his first Academy Award. I mean, Roger Deakins, like icon of the industry. He's shot some huge movies. Like he works with the Coen brothers a lot and he had never won an Oscar and he won it for Blade Runner 2049.
Yeah.
Because the movie looks fucking incredible.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of really interesting of where they pick up the story and the elements that they take with characters like Rachel. Like we didn't really know what the story was going to be. Is Rachel going to be in it? Are they going to recast Rachel?
Gagged.
When she walks out, when the Jared Leto character, I think that his last Wallace.
Yeah.
And that he kind of takes over the Tyrell Corporation because all of the replicants die out and then he's producing more of them. And when he brings out Sean Young, when he brings out Rachel to show Decker, we were in the theater gagged of this is Sean Young from 1981.
We were like throwing pop, like snapping. We were like, whack!
Gang out all over the place. Yes. Well, did you go to the gay theater in your town?
Right? No.
Did you go see that?
We didn't. But the thing was, they gooped us. Like Sean Young gooped us. She was like, well, I would have been in it if they asked me to. Like on social media and stuff.
Yeah.
So she fully gagged the world. She
boycott
was like,
the Blade Runner.
Yeah. She was
sequel.
fully just like, oh, well, I mean, I would have been a part of it if they wanted me, but clearly they don't because they never called me. And then like, there we go. We're watching the movie and I was like, oh, bitch. And yeah, it's really cool. The thing is, for like a real hard sci-fi nerd like myself, I mean, we're talking like Babylon 5 like nonsense. We're talking
Sequest.
like Sequest DSV. We're The Expanse. We're talking this shit that is like boring to people, But for me, when I sat down when I was a teenager and I was like, what am I going to watch? I was watching the weird, hard sci-fi nonsense, right? And so to see Blade Runner 2049, what I loved so much about it was the fact that, okay, it's 2049, but what year was it released?
2017.
2017.
Yep.
So it's actually released 2 years before the first Blade Runner is set. Okay. Blade Runner is set in 2019, right? And it's like, so now this is 2049. So now it's 30 years past the 2019 of 1982. Okay. So it's not our future. It's their future. It's the future of the future of the 80s. Mm-hmm. So yeah, they had flying cars already in 2019, but now there's still flying cars. Do you know what I mean? Like it was a future based on their initial retrofuturism. What they thought of in the 80s was going to be the future. Now they're expanding on that. So it can't be our future. So all the video calls that they took, it doesn't look like what we would think the future of FaceTime or Zoom would look like. It looks like the future of their shitty video calls from 1982. So all of their screens kind of look like a Kindle Paperwhite, like all of it. Like, everything was this very analog future. And to me, like a sci-fi nerd, I was like, this shit is fucking genius. The way they expanded on that kind of futurism of Sid Mead and, and the people that created the future of 1982 Ridley Scott's Blade Runner. I really love that. Another big thing that Blade Runner 2049 introduced to a lot of people was one Miss Ana de Armas.
Ana de Armas is Joy. She is
Yes.
Ryan Gosling's character. Ryan Gosling's character is called Kay, and Ryan Gosling is a replicant. He's a replicant Blade Runner.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, he absolutely. There's no question about it.
No question about it.
He is a replicant. Yeah,
he is part of the plot. He is informed that he is a replicant by the very fierce lieutenant played by Robin Wright, who does the most with kind of a nothing character too. Yeah, she's so fierce in it. But yeah, Ryan Gosling's girlfriend is named Joy, and she is played by Ana de Armas.
Yeah, and the thing is, this is a future where replicants exist, right? And he has a girlfriend who is artificial. Mm-hmm. He's a replicant himself.
She's like an elaborate hologram.
And people can buy this. They presented in the movie that it's just something that you can buy. There's commercials for Ana de Armas in the movie. As he's walking down the street, you see these big holograms of like, buy yourself, what's her name? Buy yourself Joy, and she'll come and live with you. And so he does, and he buys it, but she's a hologram. She doesn't exist as a physical, she's not a sex doll. She's not, you know what I mean? She's not Lars and the Real Girl. She doesn't have like a fleshlight.
She just comes and hangs out with you.
She just comes and she just hangs out with you.
She keeps you company.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so it's this idea of replicants exist, but now we're doing these holographic versions because there are problems with replicants and they might murder you. Your hologram, what's it going to do?
Yeah. Any of those who aren't in the know of Ana de Armas, she is the lady who was nominated for an Oscar and was raked through the coals for playing Marilyn Monroe in Blonde, which I have not seen. So I
actually think she's really good in Blonde. I think Blonde is a weird, underrated movie that I was kind of into when I watched it. But I went into it preparing to hate it, and I was like, oh, you know what? It's just a weird, artsy movie.
Yeah.
And she has Blade Runner 2049 to fall back on if people really hate her in Blonde, I guess. I don't know.
She's in the first
Knives Out.
Mm-hmm. She's in Knives Out.
Oh, cute.
First Benoit Blanc mystery. Mm-hmm. Ana de Armas is Cuban, and she has a natural accent that she speaks with, and in most of her movies, she's allowed to perform with speaking a natural Cuban accent, which I think is amazing. She is beautiful. Like her face is like, congratulations, bitch, on this face. So it's like a lot of opportunity is granted.
She is like kryptonite for straight men.
Oh my God, they love her. Mm-hmm. They love her.
True.
I also really love Wallace's assistant. Her name is Louve.
Oh, Love. Yeah. Love.
That super fierce woman.
Fucking bitch. Yeah. Oh my God. That character is fierce and scary.
And I love when she's getting her nails done and she's like doing the missiles.
Yeah.
And she's getting her nails done.
Yeah.
In that scene.
Yeah. It's very Total Recall, but she's just like, she's planning some like crazy, like people gonna die, but she's just getting those nails done. She doesn't give a fuck. She's fierce. She's amazing. Yeah.
She's got priorities. Listen.
She's a replicant. She's great. Yeah. We love her. Yeah. So 2049, I think it's a long movie.
It's very long.
It's very long.
My patience tends to wear with it in the middle too. It's like I'm really invested at the end just because there's a really great emotional arc with Deckard and Rachel. I mean, I guess I'll just say the spoiler just because it's a main plot point. But Sean Young's character Rachel ends up having a kid.
It's a crazy plot point. You got to watch to get to the bottom of how it's done and how they present it. But Deckard comes in halfway through the movie and
he's living in Vegas.
He's living in the remains of
the remains of Las Vegas,
post-apocalyptic Las Vegas. But his arc and his story is very satisfying at the end of the movie, but it is very long. Mm-hmm. And Denis Villeneuve, if you saw Dune, if you saw the other Alien one that he did, they're very much mood movies, vibe movies, something that are very beautiful to watch, but if you got your phone out, you're going to miss something, and it's okay. It's okay if you miss something. It's a movie, it's visual. If you don't get it, that's okay. You don't have to get every little thing, but I recommend it if you really liked Blade Runner. If you're just like, that was weird, it's even weirder.
Yeah. So it doesn't get any weirder from this, kids. Don't worry. It does.
Yeah.
Totally. Anyway, but
I'd
love to hear about that.
Ooh, bro.
Yeah, well, like what to wrap up a little bit, like what is it inspired and what is the legacy of this movie and, you know, a little bit of that as well.
I mean, I would say had the term cyberpunk even been coined before this movie, I mean, cyberpunk, that's a whole aesthetic. It's movies, video games, cyberpunk. And I mean, Patient Zero is definitely Blade Runner. I would just say with art direction and set design for all sorts of movies, like Hollywood movies, is that having a textured and atmosphere in your set design and art direction, that this is a world that feels very lived in, that you could walk down the street and find just as crazy as the story and follow somebody completely different, and they're in the background of this movie. Mm-hmm.
Every time we're walking through downtown LA, especially at night, I look up and I'm just like, all right, here we are. Los Angeles, 2019. Mm-hmm. You know, driving through the tunnel. It's the 2nd Street Bridge, that tunnel that he drives through several times in this movie. You can't just help but think of it when you're there.
A lot of different movies do that shot too.
A lot of movies use that. So it's an iconic looking tunnel. But I mean, as far as like inspirations, you know, like we said, anything from Total Recall, The Fifth Element, you know, television show. There was an anime series of Blade Runner called Black Lotus that was created right before 2049 was released.
Ghost in the Shell, of course. Yeah,
absolutely. But like you said, all of these things kind of reference each other, Akira and Ghost in the Shell and The Matrix, and they're all pulling from each other and getting little ideas, to kind of build these new crazy, you know, cyberpunk worlds. And
it's ludicrous to say that if we didn't have Blade Runner, we would not have The Matrix. And come at me, sisters. Okay, listen, you know it's true. Like,
yeah.
And
I love Bound so much. Exactly.
And the Wachowskis would probably say that too.
They're like, oh yeah, if there wasn't any Blade Runner, we would not have made this movie.
Yeah.
Right.
Like the work of Del Toro. I mean, Christopher Nolan talks about when doing Batman Begins and wanting to set Batman in a recognizable world. I think that he talked about using Blade Runner as a big inspiration too.
Totally.
Yeah. And then there's Netflix series, Altered Carbon. There is the show that I was talking about earlier. Now I can't think of the name, but it's got, now I can't think of the woman that I'm thinking of. It's Thomas Jane is in it. It's a Amazon Prime show. Yeah. But yeah, just there's been television shows that are influenced with it as well. But you know, even things like Babylon 5 and Deep Space Nine, they're just like, okay, yeah, we pulled from Blade Runner references. So it's like, yeah, it's just because it's so early on in the genre, it's like it is a huge influence. But again, there were other things that were just around the same time, like Akira and Ghost in the Shell was only like what 4 or 5 years after this, maybe. I think Ghost in the Shell was 86, 87 or something.
Something like that.
Yeah. So, but they all kind of are pulling from each other to create this thing. And, you know, George Lucas talks about it a lot, and people reference the lived in look of Star Wars. And that was before this. Yeah. Absolutely. But I think with Alien and, you know, and then further with this, I think Ridley Scott really kind of expanded on this lived in futurism, you know, because certain sci-fi movies, you know, if you reference, you know, Lost in Space or something, it's just very, you know, these very clean spaceships, you know, where people are in like spacesuits and, you know, and the ships are just silver and whatever. But these are just like broken down, fucked up, ugly, you know, designs that make it look like the real world. And I don't know, it's just fucking cool.
I mean, I love that Ridley Scott followed this movie up with Legend, because do you fuck with Legend? I love Legend.
I don't even know what it is.
That is like regardless of it getting like trashed reviews, people hating it, I fucking love that movie.
Legend is Ridley Scott's follow-up to Blade Runner. It's like this weird Legend of Zelda live action with Tom Cruise.
Running around with no pants, chasing after unicorns with Mia Sarah from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I love it.
And there's like goblins.
It's so cool.
Goblins following him.
I mean, it has Tim Curry in that fucking makeup.
Yeah,
it's so cool.
Tim Curry plays.
I think we've also talked about it. You know, I'm the Ferris Bueller hater, right? I'm the one who's like, I did not like him very much. I want to give it a shot, Scott. I really do. I want to be like, you know what? Jennifer Grey's here. Edith Berg's here. I want to give it a shot. My sister hates me for it. I'm just like, oh well, it's on my list. I'll maybe try to watch it again. I can't get over Matthew Broderick being an asshole.
Ferris Bueller as a character is
he's unbearable.
Yeah, he's unbearable. Yeah, he's fucking smug asshole.
I know.
And
anyway, I think Blade Runner has now stopped playing, so we've been talking for almost as long as the movie's been. But I just want to take the time to thank you both for being on the show. I think this conversation has been so wonderful, and it's different than what I normally do, I guess, but also I'm glad that this movie means something to you all, and that you've been able to talk about it as opposed to what you haven't really been able to do on your own show. Again, Blade Runner might fit in there a little bit, but I want to give you the chance to talk about something you don't get to normally do. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Of course. Do you want to plug your show and where people can find you on socials and all that stuff?
Movies That Made Us Gay. Anywhere where you stream podcasts, we do an episode every Friday. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram.
We're at Movies That Made Us Gay. If you do want to follow us on Twitter, we don't really post too much anymore. We don't really engage Twitter too much.
I don't either.
Yeah, we're there.
Overrated.
We're at MTMUG pod. But you can also, if you want to drop us an email, we're moviesthatmadeusgay@gmail.com. Very easy. But yeah, we're just Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you listen, you can find us. And go give us a shot.
Yeah, and then also follow them on Instagram separately, Scott Youngballer, Scott. And then I think you're Pete Lasagna or something like that.
Yeah, Peter Lasagna, on Instagram.
Yes. Yeah, and they're fun to look. They're fun to look at, and fun to see what they're doing. So why not?
Yeah.
But thank you guys so much for coming on the show. I'd love to have you back for something. And thanks for your time. As always, if you'd like to get in touch with me, you can do so at cultcinemacircle@gmail.com. If you'd like to give any movie recommendations, give feedback on the show, or if you'd just like to say hey, I'm open to all of it. You can also follow the show on Instagram at cultcinemacircle and on Twitter at cultcinecircle. I tend to announce the movies that I'm going to be covering and just interact with people on there if they want. You can also follow me on Letterboxd at Jesse, Jesse, Kremp, Kremp, all one word. On that platform, I tend to log the movies that I watch. I write little stupid reviews about them and just general foolishness over there. Be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe to the Cult Cinema Circle podcast on your podcatcher of choice, whether that be Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm pretty much on all of them. Be sure to leave 5 stars and a 1 to 2 sentence review about the show so we can grow the audience and then just spread the love all around. Be sure to tune in next week to the Cult Cinema Circle podcast, where I'll be covering 1997's I Know What You Did Last Summer. As they celebrate their high school graduation, 4 friends are involved in a hit-and-run accident when their car hits and apparently kills a pedestrian on an isolated roadway. They dispose of the body and vow to keep the incident a secret. A year later, somebody starts sending them letters bearing the warning, I know what you did last summer. As always, thank you for taking the time to listen to the Cult Cinema Circle podcast. And remember, I'm not in the business. I am the business. Take care. Bye.